So if you're watching on Zoom and you want to share it with your friends and family on Facebook, you can check it out on Facebook at Zionist Movement. And you can host a live feed so that your friends and family can join, because this is going to be a very important conversation. And I just got a notification that Zionist is now live. So that's
yay, the watch party has started.
The watch party is starting on my page. As soon as I figure out, yeah, start a watch party. Okay, so I'm really excited and really grateful to Tiffany for joining us for this conversation. It's a really important one that we've been talking about for a long time, the two of us, and we're really glad to bring it more broadly to the Zionist community and to everyone else who's watching. I think, obviously, if people signed up for this, they know that we're in the middle of a reckoning, that we're having a real opportunity in this country to talk about race and racial justice and, you know, progressive values and fighting for each other, fighting for the marginalized among us, and actually doing what we can to move the ball forward instead of just complaining about it. And we've seen so much of that this summer in so many different ways. But actually, the fight is just getting started, even though we're 400 years late on this. We're still, I think, at the beginning stages of what I think is going to be a real revolution of addressing the foundational systemic racism in this country. And as a Jewish community, I think it's sometimes easy to forget. It shouldn't be easy, but it sometimes feels easy to forget that we actually have challenges within our own community. It's easier to look broadly at, you know, our social structures and our country and think politically, you know, you're part of one party or another party, and that's the way you want to approach these things. But actually, this is really personal for the Jewish community. And so it's really such a privilege to have Tiffany here to talk about this. Thank you so much for doing this with us. And our goal with this conversation, and I hope people will feel free to ask questions. You could do it on the Facebook Live. I have it right next to me, so I'll be looking for questions coming in, and you could do it in the Q&A here on the Zoom. Our goal with this was to sort of bring our living room conversations into the world, because we talk about these things all the time, and we kept saying we need to do a webinar, and we said we should do it for the high holidays. We should do it at a moment of reflection and introspection as a community at a time where we're thinking about what we want to leave behind in 5780. And I know there are a lot of things that we want to leave behind right now. But there is also so much that we want to commit to moving forward. And we're in a unique opportunity, I think, to do that. So that's the most you're going to hear from me after I introduce the truly extraordinary Tiffany Harris. Tiffany just started, 2 weeks ago?
Oh my gosh, I wish I could coast that long on newness. It's I'm on week 4 right now. But let's pretend like it's week 2, because I'm still learning and making mistakes.
So Tiffany started 4 weeks ago as the Chief Programs Officer at Moishe House. And she came to Moishe House from Amazon Web Services, where she managed a global education program in cloud computing. Prior to joining Amazon, Tiffany served as Peace Corps Headquarters Public Affairs Specialist. She was a founding member of Shalom Corps, Peace Corps' Jewish Employees Resource Group, a founding member of Peace Corps' Diversity Board, and she sat on the Chief of Staff's Diversity Governance Council. The National Peace Corps Association honored Tiffany on its decennial 40 Under 40 list. Tiffany is an alumna resident of Moishe House, Washington, D.C., Columbia Heights, and Moishe House Without Walls. She is a former Moishe House board member and a former Jim Joseph Foundation board member. These experiences shaped her Jewish identity, turned her into a convener, activist, and organizer, and made her feel that she was an integral part of a global Jewish community, which she's not just an integral part of it, she is a truly exceptional leader of it. And Tiffany said she knew she wanted to work for Moishe House one day. It was just a matter of timing and a position that was a good fit. So mazel tov to you. And thank you for joining us in the professional world. I love having, badass Jewish women.
Oh my gosh. And Amanda, for those on the call, was one of the first people I called, and I said, I'm finally a Jewish professional, and it's so exciting. And I know there are some folks on the call who are also working both in lay leadership positions and in professional capacities in the Jewish space. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everyone on the call for the important work that you're doing for our community and for the world.
Thank you. I still have one more paragraph of your
Carry on.
I can't leave out how amazing she is. So Tiffany's undergraduate degrees are from Seattle University, She has an MA from Tel Aviv University, a certificate in project management from Georgetown University, and she attended the board member in the Institute for Jewish Nonprofits, which I didn't know until I read your bio last week, at the Kellogg School Center for Nonprofit Management. I didn't even know that existed, and that's amazing. So, okay, here we go. So again, so we want this to really be like the way that we talk about these issues, and we challenge each other, and we really try to address issues that are uncomfortable. And so people are going to be a little bit uncomfortable. I think that's really important. I think that's a goal right now for all of us to be a little
So
bit.
Amanda and I normally pre-pandemic, we would do this over like 5 cups of coffee and muffins or scones or whatever our like, you know, indulgent snack of choice was. And then it moved to phone calls during the pandemic. But these conversations are so valuable to me. I learned so much. We talk about the issues facing our community, facing the broader community in the world around racial justice, around Zionism. And so just so happy to invite everyone into this space that we normally don't get to share, to have this conversation with us. It's such an important time of inflection for us. So
thank you. Okay, so tell us first a little bit, and actually I just really want to say thank you for your willingness to be vulnerable with us, because I know, you know, there's this conversation like we're not supposed to ask our Black friends to teach us how to show up in these moments, and your willingness to help guide, you know, even the way that people are thinking about things I'm really grateful for that. So thank you.
oh, welcome.
Tell us about your experience in a couple of different ways. I mean, the way that you were raised, you know, how you grew up as a Black woman, as a Black Jewish woman, as a Jewish woman, you know, in the different places that you lived when you grew up, and also in Jewish communal spaces, and also your family's experience wrapped into that.
Sure. Oh my gosh, a lot to unpack. So if I miss something, let me know. But thank you again for everyone joining the call and choosing to spend your Tuesday night with us. It really, really means a lot that you're like showing up to learn, to potentially like hear things that are new or, you know, perhaps uncomfortable. And so we're just really, really thankful that you all are here. So my ethnic background, which I normally don't lead with, but it's very relevant to this conversation, so happy to share, is my mom's a Ashkenazi Jewish woman. She's Hungarian American, and my dad is African American, or, you know, as he refers to himself, he's black man. And I always think it's very interesting when I talk about my racial background, because my mom, you know, in these days, for all intents and purposes, she is white. She passes as white. She walks through life having the experiences of a white woman with very, very curly hair, but white nonetheless. But growing up, even in New York City, she's 78 now. And at that time, as we all know, like the Jewish community was not white. Like her family, she's first generation, were very, very focused on assimilation. And when I was growing up, I remember her like telling me a story about when she was growing up walking around in New York City, that if she saw someone wearing a cross necklace, that for her that was scary, because sometimes it meant she had to fight or she had to run. And so I think like racial construct is very much dependent on time and place. And I think those like power dynamics can shift over generations. So I find that piece fascinating. But when I was growing up, and I spent the first few years of my life in Boise, Idaho, we lived there for the first few years of my life, and it was beautiful and great in a number of different ways, but faced like incredible discrimination and sometimes violence. The first house that I was born in and lived in was getting vandalized all the time. My mom like made the decision, and she still does this to this day, which makes me very sad, but to put the mezuzah inside the house, because it was at times used as an identifier that this was a Jewish house. And I remember vividly coming home with her one day, and there was a group of people outside her house calling her the K word and calling her a nigger lover. Not my language. I'm sorry for anyone who had to hear that. But so 2 days later, we moved to the Pacific Northwest, packed up the station wagon and moved to Seattle, which we didn't know anybody there at the time. It was not a place where we had roots or family or anything like that. But my mom, you know, being first generation, I think she had the sense that it was not safe to live there anymore. Her parents came from Europe. They were like, we know, dangerous situation, like just get out. So yeah, we drove 2 days and then ended up in Seattle. And the first memory I have of us pulling the car up into a McDonald's parking lot to get like breakfast or something like that was a homeless guy sitting outside. And we get outside the car and he calls my mom a nigger lover. So like my very, very early experiences are shaped by, you know, and not necessarily in like a very negative way. Of course, it was traumatizing, but very shaped by this mission to like confront racial issues in this country. So anyway, my parents divorced. I grew up with my mom. Seattle at the time was like a very like predominantly white community, also not a very large Jewish community. So living on the East Coast has been such a fun experience in the last few years of living in Israel. Yeah, thank you. But I grew up with a strong sense of Jewish identity, and you know, we went to synagogue just for high holidays, but have very vivid memories of feeling the warmth and love of that community. And it really gave me a strong sense of identity and purpose and pride, which I think is so important for anyone to have, especially like a racial minority in this country where you don't often see yourself represented in positions of power. But this incredible like origin story and story of like survival and all of the amazing things that the community has done and continues to do was very, very powerful for me. I didn't know any other Jews of color when I was growing up, but I remember my mom would always tell me, she would say like, there are people in Israel who look like you. And I was like, I don't know if that's true, but I like the idea of it. And it was so pivotal for me when I went on birthright. It was actually the first time I left the country, the first time I had been overseas. And I remember the first experience seeing the Ethiopian Jewish community, meeting like Sephardi Jews for the first time, the Yemeni community, and really seeing people who had like hair like mine and faces like mine and skin like mine. And I just felt this overwhelming sense of home and belonging. Like I'd always had like a strong sense of Jewish identity, and there were aspects of, you know, our tradition that I really, really loved, but then finally seeing myself reflected in the community, I knew I would always go back there one day to live and spend a significant amount of time. And it sort of like sealed the deal for me, right? Because I think like as American Jews, especially like coming from like a multiracial, multi-faith family, like you really make a concerted choice every day to show up as Jewish, to be Jewish, to continue the practices, to continue our traditions. And that for me was like a very pivotal moment. So fast forward a bunch of years and a bunch of like backpacking trips around the world and quitting my corporate job to join the Peace Corps, all of that stuff afterward.
So interesting. Israel was your first time that you left the country, because I feel like you've traveled. How many countries have you been in now?
I think now it's like 87 or something like that, but Israel was the first. Israel was the first. And when people ask me like, where's your favorite place you lived? I say Switzerland and Israel. Switzerland because the mountains are amazing and I love cheese. I love that it's so centrally located for me to jump off to a bunch of other places, Israel included. But living in Israel was like the happiest and healthiest I'd ever been. I mean, there's that, you probably know better than I do, but the statistic, like, isn't it like the #6 happiest country in the world? Or
something crazy, something totally crazy.
Yeah, something like that. And it's like, there was so much political and social chaos at the time, but I have never, you know, and I was living in a place where there were like hot wires like sticking out of my wall, like in like a very, very cheap apartment. I have never been happier and more fulfilled and just more at home than when I was living in my like dingy apartment on Bogershov. So it is in my like plans one day to go back. And I think all of us who've spent a significant time in Israel are always like, I would love to go back again for a significant period of time. But
we're going together next
Go ahead.
We're going together next summer.
Oh my gosh, yes. I have a credit from United to go back there because my trip was canceled. So I do go back to Israel every year, and I don't think I don't feel like something about like the cadence of my year just doesn't feel right if I haven't gone at least once a year. I know that probably resonates with some folks on the call, and it's just like, and when people ask me like what I love so much about it, it's just like Israel just has a soul. Like there's like a neshama there that like you can't. Yeah, and maybe it's the food. Maybe it is the food. I love food. I love the sweets.
You have good cheese
maybe it's the cheese, the beach, the beautiful people, but yeah, who knows? So that was such a paramount point in my life. And when I came back to the States, after that, I came to DC for a job. I was looking for Jewish community because in Israel, I found that I was just so spoiled in the sense that like Shabbat happens, like whether or not you prepare for it, right? Like everything is going to shut down. Like the cadence of the year is around like the holidays. Like you don't have to request time off at work. Like it just, I felt when I came back, I was like, I really have to work harder now to like find and build Jewish community. And the story I tell, which is not, I don't know how relevant it is to this conversation, but it's kind of a funny thing, is I used to wear this like CrossFit Tel Aviv shirt everywhere. My friends who know me know that I love like working out and running every day. And I was like, this is the way I'm going to meet other Jews. And they're going to be like Jews who like working out. I'm going to wear this to the gym. I'm going to find a guy, like some girlfriends, like, and it totally worked. It's how I found Moishe House. And some of my best friends who I'm still close with to this day, because not everybody knows like Tel Aviv, right? But like, if you know, like you're kind of like an insider. Either you've been there, you got Jewish friends, you're Jewish yourself. So anyway, I moved into Moishe House here in Washington, D.C., the Columbia Heights house here. And I don't think I had ever really considered myself a leader or an organizer or a community builder before that. But part of the like what residents in Moishe House do is they build programming for the Jewish community, and the programming is responsive to the needs and wants of that community. So a lot of that in DC was shaped around like policy and activism, given the time that we're in. Of course, like all across the country, it will be like Shabbat dinners or, you know, like soap making, whatever brings community together. But for us, it was really around issues related to justice, and some fun events too. But that's where I got my chops wet as an organizer. And then later, after the police killing of Michael Brown, I was really kind of examining like, what is my role in the community, and kind of what is the, aside from like loving Israel and loving being Jewish and feeling like I have some of the skills to be an organizer and drive social change, like what's kind of the unique offering that I can deliver to help our community move toward that justice that we want to see. And I felt like I had a kind of unique vantage point, being Black and Jewish, and kind of having that experience in both worlds. So I built a website called youdon'tlookjewish.com, which doesn't exist anymore. So don't try to go there, because now that luckily there are so many incredible people working in that space, I decided, pass the mic, this doesn't need to exist anymore, which is actually a great thing. We all want to work ourselves out of business if we're working in like the NGO and justice space. Right. But so being a Jew of color, walking into Jewish spaces in the States, what you hear most often is, you don't look Jewish, or what are you doing here? Who are you visiting? I think sometimes our experiences in the Jewish community sadly like reflect the experiences of people of color in this country at large, even though I know that's not what any of us want. So I built the website, and originally it was just to showcase Jews of color doing Jewish things. So like Jew of color lighting a Hanukkah, like putting on tefillin, different things like that. And then it grew into interviews with like rabbis and thought leaders who were Jews of color. Then I expanded it to like redheads and just anyone who didn't look like the stereotypical Jewish person, because I was thinking about around a lot of these like police killings, which were like really becoming a part of our dialogue at the time, that, you know, the fear and misunderstanding that can come when you don't know someone. And I think there's a lot of power in just kind of like resetting your brain. So in that case, it was like, you know, encouraging people to make friends of color and like to know other community members. In this case, it was like, look at pictures of Jews of color doing Jewish things and reset the automatic assumption that comes into your brain when you think of someone who's Jewish, which I think for a lot of people is like Seinfeld or Elaine Bennis or something. Yeah. But it's like, we are no like single shape, size, color, language spoken, anything like that. So that was the goal. It grew into something big and incredible, and I loved running it. And now, luckily today, like I was saying, there are so many incredible people working in that space. So I, you know, I don't run it anymore, but that was what I did living in DC. And so since that time, I've been very, very involved in justice work and activism around Jews of color and racial justice at large, particularly in the Jewish community. And one other thing to add, like as it relates to just kind of my bio and my background is, I think sometimes I find it surprising, but I think it is really hard sometimes for people to conceptualize like the experience of being Black in this country. Like you can read anecdotes, like watch the videos that we've all seen, hear stories. And it was just really powerful in kind of an awful way growing up to see like the very, very different experiences that I have a brother who has blonde hair and blue eyes, a half brother, and then my other brother who is also half Black. And they grew up in the same household, same parent, same education, same socioeconomic background, and their experiences with the police and with racism, and then also, you know, tangentially in the Jewish space, were extremely different. My Black brother he's not involved in the Jewish community at all. He doesn't like associate. I think he was, sadly, like so many people in our community, someone who goes in and they have 1, 2, 3, 4 bad experiences and they never come back. And it just breaks my heart. And I'm always trying to pull him back in. So don't worry, we're going to get him back. But I think that's the experience for a lot of people in our community who just want to show up and just be in community and not be different and not feel othered. And then, you know, I think I was telling you this on the phone the other day, the very first time he was arrested was when he was 10 years old. In our very nice neighborhood, he was accused of stealing a kid's backpack, which it was later found out he didn't do. But like that sort of like discrimination and treatment really, really starts early. And my brother, you know, he talked like my white mother. It wasn't like he came from a different background than like, you know, anyone else in our community, but like none of that will save you against discrimination in this country. And that's really, that's a sad fact that I think we all have a responsibility to work against. So that's where we are today. And I think we're just in a really incredible, like, it is awful what's been happening in our country in the past, well, past like couple hundred years, but particularly in the past few months, this awakening. And it is such an opportunity for us to reflect, you know, to commit to Teshuvah at this period of time, and to really think about like how we're going to show up in the year to come, now and in the year to come, politically, socially, all of that. So I'm really, really thankful for everyone on this call, and we've got work to do. We're going to sit and chat for an hour, and then afterward, we're going to get off our butts and commit to some action.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's so, I mean, as you're talking, there's so many places to go with the things that you said. I get this background just says crazy things, so I'm sorry if you only see like half of my face. You know, I feel like people who are part of the more Ashken normative, you know, Jewish community may think that your experience obviously is unique in a lot of ways, but it's not totally unique. I think people don't realize 15 to 20% of the American Jewish community are Jews of color, are people who don't look like
me. I think that number, I've heard people believe it's an undercount. So
there's so much debate over that number.
There's so much debate over that number, but you know, whether you believe it's 15 or 24 or potentially higher, we can't believe that like our numbers aren't shifting or that our community is a monolith. I do think like, just given the demographics across the country, and we all remember like the Brandeis and the Pew studies, like the demographics in our community are going to change, like whether we like it or not. And we need to create like a welcoming space for people, because at the end of the day, I think you and I and everyone on this call and like the broader community all want the same thing for this like beautiful way of life to continue to flourish, the door of a door, right?
So I mean, it's, you know, you said whether we like it or not, and I'm thinking, what's not to like? I mean, we have such beautiful diversity in our community, and I think to the extent that we want to think about the Jewish future, we want every single Jewish person who identifies as part of our community, a member of our community, to feel part of it, because we are a tiny people with a huge mission in the world. And the more of us who are showing up, the more of us who are unified, the more of us who are doing the hard work of both advancing and protecting our community and advancing and protecting all of the other marginalized and historically oppressed communities that we care about, the better the outcomes will be for all of us. Absolutely. I think.
And I think we also have to remember that our community has never been a monolith. Even like when we were living in Eastern Europe, everybody spoke different languages. I encourage everybody to make friends from across the Jewish, you know, specter. If not for the food, always comes back to food for me, for the variety of food and languages that you will experience, but your life and your community will be enriched. But we've never, ever been a monolith. We've never been quote unquote white. And I think that change and that realization is sometimes hard for people, because I think visibly what we see are a lot of like Ashken normativity, but that's not reflective of what our community actually looks like or how it's ever looked.
And as you said, in Israel, people see American Ashken normativity and decide that the Jews are white. And certainly, most of us in America present as white and have privileges. We're going to come back to, I think some of the ways that there's been a drift between, and we'll also talk about Black-Jewish alliance, Black-Jewish relations, that term, but where historically the Jewish and Black communities have been so aligned on politically and on justice issues, there have been challenges. But it's so interesting because it's not interesting, it's terrible, but it's interesting that people see the Jewish community as white, as powerful, privileged white people without knowing the history. I mean, your family was attacked in Idaho for both your Jewish identity and your dad's Blackness. Like it's,
yeah. And my mom was attacked growing up purely for her Jewish identity by
right.
Italian, Irish, whoever it was at the time. Yeah.
So,
but I think it's on us to share. There's so much we really have to confront. I mean, that misinformation and stereotypes. And I think we're generally pretty good at it. But one of the ways we do that is like by building alliances and authentic relationships across religious, ethnic, national, groups. Yeah. So it's really up to us to show up and challenge that narrative, and also not to perpetuate those narratives and stereotypes on other groups.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And you and I have also talked a lot about, I think this will resonate for a lot of people listening, how hard it sometimes is to sit down and like break bread with people that you fundamentally disagree with about issues. And in this, toxic political moment, I think that's harder than ever before, but we really have to try. Like we really have to try, not just Jews that you may be politically not aligned with, but members of other communities who, Tiffany and I talked about BDS and combating BDS and reaching people who are BDS activists because they genuinely believe that it's a human rights movement. They genuinely believe that they're standing up for good, for human and civil rights for people, and they don't understand how it harms the Jewish community or how we perceive it as anti-Semitic. So without having an opportunity to engage those people, you can't change anyone's mind. And sometimes it's very hard. And very frustrating.
Before I was really sort of, and we had this conversation when I was talking about my dear friend who I have so many disagreements with, and we have the most like lively, heated debates and discussions because I really do, she is from Pakistan. She wears like a hijab and she is an activist, and she believes that, what she's doing is good in the world. And learning that narrative around like why people support BDS, which I think is so damaging and terrible, was very, very important for me to understand the framing around that. And then I could confront it directly. We vehemently disagree with each other on so many issues. We're very aligned on some racial justice issues, but I think it's a really good, it's kind of like if you're doing like hill sprints or going on a run, it's so painful. It's good for your body. It's good for your mind. And I think it really, really gives us the understanding and the framing to confront these issues, which we really, really have to do. And that's another responsibility I think we all have to like stand up against like misinformation and injustice when we see it. And I feel that way about the BDS movement as well.
Okay, so we're way off track. So I'm gonna pull up. No, I think it was my fault. I have so much to talk about. I wanna go back to our theme, which is action items. What people can do, what we would recommend, what you would recommend for people who are well-intentioned, right? Like people who really want to do better, who do care about racial justice, who do care about real, true inclusion in the Jewish community. And so I have like a two-pronged question. And you can obviously handle it however you want. It's the same question, but it's as individuals, what do we do as individuals when we are in uncomfortable situations, when we are confronted with maybe, a substantially older family member who uses a Yiddish term that's extremely, inappropriate and uncomfortable? What do we do if, normally we would be showing up at synagogue this weekend? I don't know if a lot of people are doing that, but if someone does go to synagogue and sees someone they don't know, whether it's someone that looks exactly like them or it's someone who doesn't, how do we want people to approach each other? And it feels like it's so obvious, but I think for some people it really isn't. They're really not sure how to approach people that they don't know, how to engage as human beings to build relationships in a positive way. How to do it in a way that doesn't make people feel uncomfortable, like you said with your experiences, and maybe your brothers, going into a synagogue and being asked, what are you doing here? Are you Jewish? What's your story? What's your background? We know we don't want to do that, but what do we want to do? And then the same question, that goes for individuals is for our institutions in terms of creating truly inclusive Jewish institutions, which we know are Ashkenazi normative, and we know there is so much strength in the diversity of our community. How do we reach people at their vulnerable? I think there is vulnerability all around, and go from that place into a stronger place as individuals and as members of our communal institutions.
Those are all phenomenal questions. And I think if I miss one, let me know. And also, because you have great ideas and you're like very involved in this work, feel free to chime in as well. And other folks add it in the chat if you have ideas. But I think like what do we do in uncomfortable situations? I would always say, walk boldly toward your discomfort. Okay. Like, don't like exit the situation, confront it, stay in it, sit with it and experience it. Because you're not going to get comfortable until you get uncomfortable. Right. So, and I think as it relates to like family members, and I don't know, obviously our like Hagim traditions are going to look very different this year than they have in the past. But, I think, and even I've had these experiences when you're sitting around the table with like grandma or your uncle or, whoever it is. I think we sometimes give people a free pass, like when they're in our family or if they're older or from like a different background, to say some things that we find uncomfortable or intolerable. And I think we also have a duty to confront those in a gentle way, in a teachable moment. But we really do. And I think about like, when I see some of these pictures of like these hate-filled rallies that we have across our country and we've had for decades, and you see little kids out there or like really, really young people, and you wonder like how these like just hateful views like persist from generation to generation. And you think about like these things being said at the dinner table, and you look around and it's like there are little kids sitting at the table hearing that and thinking that it's okay. So like, that's one like really huge reason why it's important to confront that. Of course, like in a gentle way that's still loving. They're your family member, like it's a teachable moment, but really like think about who's around the table, who's hearing, who's internalizing that, and then who's going to go out and act in this world. Again, that's like the Lador thing, or the Lador saying like we all have a responsibility to pass the kind of traditions on to the next generation, the beautiful Jewish traditions that we love so much, but also this like love for humanity, love for the stranger, and this pursuit of justice. Yeah.
I was just going to jump in and say, by the way, it may feel really hard to confront, even if lovingly, a family member if you hear them say something that is intolerable, but it's actually really good practice, because you want to be showing up in the world as a person who confronts things that are intolerable, and they're everywhere. And when we return to normal life, whatever that will look like and whatever that will happen, it will be in our faces all the time. And we will have learned a lot, I think, from this moment that, we've been living through the last few months. I think people have been confronting implicit bias in new ways. They've been looking at their own, relationship to racism and racist institutions. They've been thinking about what they can do with their vote, how they can be civically involved with organizations. But on a personal level, I would say it's something, and I feel like sometimes we're like, I'm not the leader. I'm not the one, someone else is going to be the one to stand up, but it's not, it has to be you. It always has to be you. And then, like
that is like another like Pirkei Avot classic of like, you're not obligated to complete the work, but you can't like from it. Like, yeah.
If it's not you, it won't be anyone. That's the like, I feel like we actually have to live that. And I've lived it in frustrating ways too, but we want it to be everyone, but until it's you, it's not anyone. So,
and I think the other, like, it can feel incredibly overwhelming to think about everything that's happening in the world and what kind of change we want to make, and like how, to even confront some of these processes, it starts with ourselves, and then maybe our family and the people we're close to, and then our immediate community, and then builds out from there. But definitely if you hear those things happening in the home that you're in or where you're invited to, that's a place to show up first and foremost.
Yeah. And it might, even if it feels really hard, it might actually be the easiest place to show up.
Yeah. And you like, I mean, you know, it's holiday political family arguments are a classic that everybody goes through. You have a huge community of amazing women in the Zionist community and broader community who will understand the struggle, sneak off, have a glass of wine, whatever you need. But this is also
Really
important
tough.
work. Yeah.
Really tough.
I think the other one about like, how do we approach people in Jewish situations or in Jewish spaces in a way that makes them feel welcome? I mean, I think the one thing I always like to stress is like, our community is not a monolith. The Jewish community as a whole is not a monolith, and certainly not like the Jews of color community. So I think that in some cases too, like, especially when you get to know someone, it's like, ask them, you know, treat people the way they want to be treated. And not everyone prefers like the same terms, the same welcoming. And if you make a mistake or commit a faux pas, that is okay. Apologize, move on. Don't beat yourself up about it. So that first and foremost. But I tell people too, like when I see another Jew of color in a Jewish space, like I'm so curious. I immediately want to ask them like what their background is. And like, but you just don't, until it's like relevant and in the, like, until somebody wants to share that, it's real, because it really has like nothing to do with why they're there, or, you know, like the friendship that I might hope to build with this person. So I would just say temper that curiosity if you're able to, and at some point, but just, you know, say hi and welcome someone the same way you would anyone else. And I think, again, like it might feel uncomfortable, but it's going to feel comfortable eventually, the more times you do this, and to just walk toward that and confront that discomfort. And yeah, it's a wonderful thing, like when we have guests in Jewish spaces and when the community really reflects like the true diversity of the Jewish people. So yeah, I think you do a great job with that. So also just ask Amanda if you're ever in doubt, or me.
It's hard. And I feel honestly so grateful, and I'm going to tie this back to something you said earlier. I feel so grateful for your friendship and for so many other people who are trying to bridge these divides, that have allowed me to like call you and say, I don't know if I'm getting this right. You know, how do I do it better? Because we, you know, it is really hard. Like, I'm not the victim here, but you know, we all want to do better. I think there's so much good intention. And you know, when I said I want to tie it back to something you said earlier, it's about how you said not all Jews have relationships with people of color, Jews of color or otherwise. And so if you don't have a friend that you can have a real conversation with and bounce ideas off of and talk about the complexity and be uncomfortable, you're not going to really have that opportunity to push yourself and figure out how to do it better. And so, you know, so I, first of all, I'm so grateful for you, aside from Zionist, just for your friendship. I've learned a lot.
Likewise.
And
you're like my like educational guru on like so many different things. So yeah, it's mutual.
But there's something else you said that is really meaningful for me, which is, as Jews, we want to bring, most people in the world have never met a Jewish person. So when we talk about anti-Semitism on the rise, when we talk about it in minority communities, when we talk about it in Europe, you know, we talk about it, we are a tiny percentage of the world's population. And for the most part, we're living in big cities, you know, in suburban areas, in blue states, frankly. And so in a lot of places in the United States, people have never met a Jewish person before. And I have talked about this with Black friends and leaders who've said, you have to understand, the stereotypes take hold because we are not necessarily doing enough to reach people, to reach outside of our community. And there's something so powerful about, you know, making that effort to build relationships with people who don't know us, even though it's really hard sometimes, and I'm sure it's really challenging. But the holidays are actually an amazing opportunity to do that, to invite, typically, not this year, but to invite people to your home. And I'm going to do a plug here. I'm going to sound like an infomercial, but for Jew Belong, if people are not signed up for Jew Belong's High Holidays event on Friday, it's a virtual event. It's amazing, you know, celebrities, media personalities. It's called Jew Belong intentionally because it's intended to reach people who are not Jews. I mean, it's for Jews and, you know, and allies of the Jewish community who have never experienced a Rosh Hashanah dinner or, you know, Yom Kippur, or what it means to repent and to atone and, you know, and to reflect on your year. And I think that is such a beautiful thing because there's so many incredible lessons in, you know, in the way that we observe these holidays. And there's so much for other people to, to carry with them also. But we need to not evangelize, but we need to tell people who we are, tell people about, reach outside, and build real relationships with people. And I know you do that all the time.
Oh my gosh, that's like such a, first of all, very excited for the event on Friday. I can't wait. But it really is like the holidays and Shabbat. I mean, we're so lucky we have Shabbat every single week, and it's always an opportunity, post pandemic, to invite people into our home. Like the very last Shabbat dinner I hosted before the pandemic, it was like a rainbow of like folks who had never like celebrated Shabbat or like met a Jewish, and it was so amazing. And I was like so tickled afterward, because I remember like, we're so lucky.
Sorry, I was looking on the feed to see if there were questions in it.
Oh, no worries. But like one of my Muslim friends was like, I'm going to start doing this. Like, what's the bread called? And I was just like, it just like touches my heart that like, I mean, that we can open our homes like that. And I think, when we talk about the sort of like how our communities are so segregated, it's just like really important to like, I mean, a lot of that like exists because of like policies that were put into practice like decades ago, and continue to this day, like redlining and things like that. Like our communities really, really are so segregated. So like, in addition to voting, participating in the census, all of those things, like we really do have to work harder to like bridge those physical divides. And I think to address some like the policy and political issues that separate us.
Yeah, I want to talk just for a minute about redlining and white flight and some of the things that I think really were part of, to the extent that there's a division. I think in a lot of ways, the division between the Black and Jewish community is artificial, is people trying to, really white supremacists trying to insert divisions between us, because when we are united against that fight, we can defeat white supremacy. And when we're not, we can't. But we did this webinar, and people should really look it up. It's on our website, with Professor Mark Dollinger, who Tiffany, I think we've talked about him, is in San Francisco. He is a historian on Jewish history and American history. And he wrote a book called Black Power, Jewish Politics, which is really important for people to read. And really during the George Floyd protests, he created really a new thesis that he was working, that he was really teaching the Jewish community all over the country to learn that while the Jewish community certainly has a history of allyship in every social justice space in the history of this country, it's not a perfect history. Our story is not perfect. And he calls it acculturation. He talks about how the Jewish community, certainly the Ashkenazi Jewish community, and to the extent that other Jewish immigrants could pass as white, became white to acculturate, to become American, and participated in all of the same things that white Americans were participating at the expense of Black people for hundreds of years. And so we certainly didn't participate at greater levels. We've actually participated at much lower levels. We certainly showed up in the civil rights movement and otherwise, but we kind of have a narrative in the Jewish community that says we've always showed up. We've always been the perfect allies. And we kind of point to Abraham Joshua Heschel and say, we did it, we're good. It should all be perfect, but
check the box.
Check the box, right? Like look at a picture of Martin Luther King and Joaquin Prince was standing next to him. And we should be so proud of that, I think, but the work is not done. That was more than 50 years ago. And I think it's an important reminder. I'm not saying it to shame anyone, it's not, but we're looking at an opportunity here. We're also looking at one of the most complex political moments in American history, where activism really matters, where voices coming together, diverse voices coming together, are moving coalitions forward, and there could be an actual policy agenda that changes when we're showing up. So
I mean, and that was part of the case in the civil rights movement. And I think, a lot of the value in that comes in like, I love telling those stories to communities that aren't aware, but it by no measure does it mean that the work is finished and that we can coast on that forever. But it does remind us that it can be done. Like significant gains were made, and I think we did play some role in that. But yeah, it's really about what are we doing in this moment right now.
How does it feel, if you don't mind my asking, how does it feel for you in Jewish communal spaces when you hear like Jews are the best allies ever to the Black community because of Rabbi Heschel, and for example, the conversation about Black Lives Matter and the anti-Semitism, the anti-Zionism in the platform, as if somehow the Jews shouldn't be showing up now, although you are a Jew. It's like the suggestion that you shouldn't be showing up for one piece of your identity because of another piece of your identity. I mean, how do you navigate those things?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I can just, for that, I'll talk about like my personal experience, which may not like reflect those of like the broader Jews of color community or, you know, what have you. But that was such an isolating and difficult time. I mean, when I see those videos of like police brutality and like these kind of like extrajudicial killings of, you know, unarmed Black men, I see my brother, I see members of my family, I see people who I love and care about, and, you know, I see a human being first and foremost. And I think it affects people of color. Sadly, it should affect us all the same, but it affects people of color really differently. And I during that period, like the racial justice space in the Jewish community, I say that like it was a really lonely place to be for a really, really long time, especially as it relates to like the movement for Black lives. Like we did not show up early and in a significant way. And then, you know, whatever it was with their platform, mission statement, like then a lot of like mainstream communities were saying like, you can't mention this organization, you can't be involved. And it's like, we're just saying Black lives matter, like humanity matters, and showing up for racial justice, which we all have a duty to do. And so that was like one of the toughest points in my kind of Jewish journey and sense of identity, because I felt like I was being asked to choose. And I see myself as Black and Jewish, like not half and half, not, you know, some sort of like math equation. They're both like such integral parts of my identity that I can't separate. And I just hope that like I never have to do that again. And I know a lot of other people feel that way as well. And you know, I'm so happy that people are showing up now in a really significant way and willing to have these conversations, but it was at the expense of so much pain and suffering for people in and outside of our community that it's like, there's some like hurt and sadness around that also.
It remains. It definitely, and it's still there from 2014 and 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that it's something that we should all be reflecting on, because, well, for obvious reasons, but also because we need to be in these spaces. It's not an option as Jews. We care about these issues and we need to be in the spaces, and we care about our fellow humankind. And I think for people who are joining, I think probably most likely people who are joining with Zionists know that, you know, there's a significant portion of the American Jewish community that are people of color, but to think about our fellow Jews facing a moment like that where they feel like they have to choose a piece of their identities, where Tiffany, and I'm now speaking to the audience and not Tiffany, where Tiffany felt like she had to choose, like the Jewish community was not going to stand with her in the fight for racial justice in this country. I often talk about the moment that Zionists launched, where I felt like I had to choose between being a feminist and being a Zionist, where in America, being a feminist means that I am protecting my bodily integrity and autonomy. And Black Lives Matter for Black people is literally about protecting their bodies, protecting their children, protecting their physical safety, and to say
their ability to breathe in oxygen, which we all have a right to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So Sarah Liss.
I will say too, like, oh my gosh. And I'm just, yeah, no, I nothing else to add except thank you so much for bringing that up.
It's people, first of all, don't thank me, but it's people don't actually realize what they're saying. I think it's very easy to forget about the human beings that are affected. And Chloe Valdry on our board says we cannot talk about human beings as political abstractions. It's a enchantment. It's just like, you know, we talk about whole groups of people. She started that conversation when it came to Israelis. Like, Israelis are a political abstraction as people. Black Lives Matter is representing Black people in America who are facing systemic racism that is affecting their very ability to breathe, as you said, Tiffany. So
I do think oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm just ranting.
Well, it is really like, I mean, there are a lot of people in our community, especially like young people, who like connect very deeply to these issues. And I'm really happy Zionists exist, because when I felt like I had to make that choice, like the spaces that felt safe and comfortable, and I saw like, okay, there are other progressive issues being represented and talked about here, then it would be like, and now on to BDS, and I'm like, wait, what? So I was so happy when I found a space that exists for like this. Serves such a need and such a purpose, but like I just, it breaks my heart that for so long, the only place you could find like justice issues really being pursued in a meaningful way were spaces where people were also misguided, as I feel, as it relates to Israel policy issues.
So let's talk a little bit about that, actually, because obviously that's part of the challenge. The overwhelming majority of American Jews identify as Zionist, meaning we believe that Israel should exist, that we believe in our liberation movement as Jewish people. We believe in, our right to self-determination in a sovereign and safe home, Jewish home, in our ancestral homeland, by the way. So that is so misunderstood. And we have allowed other people to pervert that term Zionism over decades. And it's become so entrenched in a lot of progressive spaces that it makes a lot of Jews feel like they have to choose a piece of their identity, in a similar way. And so they feel like, and I think I obviously cannot speak for Jews of color, but going to what you just said, Tiffany, where you felt like in a racial justice space, you had to choose between pieces of your identity. It's obvious. I mean, if I were you, I would choose the racial justice space first, because of course you have to. That's about your life and
Matter of life and death. Yeah.
Literally about your life, like tomorrow, not your life, in the future. Obviously, I think we agree that Israel's existence is in many ways a life and death issue for Jewish continuity, but like your life today.
But it really is, like we were saying before, like as Jews in America, and especially like as a Jew of color, it's like you have to choose Judaism every day, like making an active choice to like engage in Jewish ritual, to study, to practice, to read, to gather. And but I can't not be a Black woman. Like I can't separate. It's not something I show up like that every single day. So when it comes to like having to make that choice, it really is the kind of like, and I haven't had the same experiences that my brother has, though, like, you heard the story of like my childhood and what we experienced there, but like, I think about his life as well and all of the other people in my family, that it really is a very real choice that they've been confronted with.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I've been kind of dancing around the point of the Zionism question, which is, I think, and this goes also to Sarah Liss's question that she asked about vulnerability. And Sarah and I talk about this a lot, that it feels like in the institutional and the Ashken normative Jewish community, there's a vulnerability to being fully inclusive with the full diversity of the Jewish community, because Jews of color, especially Black Jews, I think there is a sense that, I have no idea what the numbers would say or the statistics, but I think there is a sense of vulnerability in the institutional community that if we were to be fully representative of the diversity of our community, there would be a dilution of the commitment to Zionism. That because Jews of color are choosing domestic issues that literally affect their absolute lives, when faced with the choice of racial justice or Zionism, that they choose racial justice. And I think there needs to be an understanding of why that choice obviously has to be made.
Nobody wants to separate the two, right?
They haven't, a plug for Zionists is that I think Black people haven't been given a community, a safe space where they don't have to make the choice, because the choice exists in a lot of places. But the answer, in my opinion, should not be, we can't be inclusive because we're going to be harming the Jewish community's connection to Israel. If Jews of color don't feel invited and welcome into our institutions, and people may get upset, this may be uncomfortable for people, if Jews of color are not welcomed into our institutions, why would they be invested in Jewish continuity to the extent that they have to check their racial justice commitment in their activism? Am I making sense?
No, I mean, completely. And I mean, my thoughts, I have heard that before about like the kind of like watered down argument or like the vulnerability. And for some people, I'm like, that is wrapped up in like what I think are like some unsavory racial views and like just pure discrimination. probably not anyone on this call, but it is a very like, yeah, I think there's sometimes a little bit more to that argument, but really like, I mean, I think about someone like my brother who I have, it's like, you know, you show up in a space and you're asked why you're there, like 4, 5, 6 times, or, you know, the experience that we've both had of somebody handing us like an empty coffee cup or a dirty plate to take back to the kitchen. It's like, why would you come back? Like, why would you choose to be made to feel that way ever again when you have the choice? And you really have to like actively put yourself in those spaces. And I think I'm a little bit more of a rebel in that sense, that I was like, well, I'm just gonna like keep showing up until they like know that I'm a regular. But for others, it's a little bit harder. And I don't think that that's some like innate thing in like our community as Jews of color. Like we want to be Jewish, we want to be involved, we want to be engaged. As I spoke about before, like what an incredible sense of purpose and pride that it's given my life. It shaped my identity and given me a sense of purpose around like justice and how I choose to move about the world every single day. And I think that's the case for so many other people, but we have to create a welcoming space for others to experience that and then go live like meaningful Jewish lives. You know, the like immediate othering when somebody walks into a space, or even like kind of expressing the fear that like being more inclusive would water down the community, it does the complete opposite. Yeah.
It's unfortunate. I mean,
It's a safe space to have those conversations. So like, and I do think people need to carve out spaces to ask those questions and to kind of confront those. I wouldn't, you know, shy away from like dissecting that, but really like it does not serve our community well for the next generation, and to like continue flourishing and living this vibrant Jewish, you know, life that we want.
yeah, I mean, I think the thesis for me is for the leadership that feels this vulnerability is the more we are in relationship with each other, the more we can express our fears and concerns about the future together. And so being in a relationship, showing up for the Jews of color in our community, making sure they feel welcome, making sure they feel part. There's only power in that in the Jewish future. There's only
Power in making space. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, and I know that we're like running a little bit short on time, but we did talk about like the institutional Jewish world is making space for Jewish leaders of color, for, you know, young dynamic leaders like you and like other people to be represented in these spaces, because I think that also goes a long way to making our community more inclusive, to building bridges between those communal, national divides that we see so much of. And I think that that's also very important.
Okay, so I know we are running out of time. I'm looking at the questions, and I think we've mostly touched on them. And I want to ask Tiffany, just going to the theme that that we started with. What do we want to leave behind, and what do we want to bring with us? And I'll say we know what we want to bring with us in terms of standing up every time we hear something that we know is a problem. In terms of reaching out to new people in our Jewish communal spaces, building relationships as people, not as, curious, folks who, when you build a relationship, you will learn more about someone's history and background, but do it because you would do it for anyone, not because you're trying to figure out why someone's there. And, there are so many other things, but I would love to hear more from you in terms of the specific tangible things that we want people to do, and what we want to leave behind, because we've talked about this and I'm really inspired by your answer.
Oh yeah, we talked about this a little bit. So I think what we want to leave behind, it's been a really tough summer for all of us. We've all like felt the fear and hopelessness and just uncertainty around like the virus, around racial justice, the election, everything that's happening. I want us to leave behind a feeling of despair and hopelessness. Because we do have a choice here, and we do have a calling to make change. As the Jewish people, it's like it's part of our like mandate to pursue justice, to make this world a better place for everyone. And we have a calling to like improve the community to which we belong. I think that like voting and civic participation, getting involved and showing up, is such a Jewish act. Like the Mishnah and the Torah talks about like the importance of being involved in your community and doing that work. And so that's what I want us to give up the hope or the hopelessness and the despair and move toward the new year with a sense of action, whether it's getting involved in the political process, getting involved in Zioness, like gathering community, going outside of your community and making like authentic relationships with people who are different from you to learn more, but really, really showing up in that way. And also like, let's get uncomfortable in the next year. I know we've been like pretty uncomfortable, but let's confront some of these hard truths. Let's put ourselves in situations where we have the ability to learn and grow, and let's get out there and like engage in civic participation that's going to make the world that we want to see for ourselves, for our children, and for the next generation. So that's my wish for Rosh Hashanah. And I think you and I are on the path, and all of our people who are here with us watching, but you know, get your friends and family involved too, because it's so, so, so important.
Yeah, I was just going to try to pull up the questions again, but Facebook will start playing the video. So, so if I missed your question, I'm really sorry.
We're happy that you're here. We're so happy that you're here.
We're so happy that you're here. We hope you'll share this. We hope you'll commit to these things because they're actually pretty easy. I think, you know, I think there's this opportunity for reflection that we've had over this time during COVID and over this time with all the protests and all of the attention being paid that is so long delayed on a lot of these issues. I think so many people are waking up to them. But as we approach a new year, and we all want so many things for the new year, and we've been facing so many challenges, I really want us to commit to the small things of actually, of, like you said to me, of being uncomfortable. Do we have a group organized in Atlanta? Yes, I will. Yes, please shoot me an email. Amanda,
remember that you have a community of people with you doing this work. You have Amanda, you have me, you have like such incredible, badass Jewish men and women who are out there. You're not doing this work alone. You're doing it in community with people who are also committed to the work. So
yeah,
don't feel overwhelmed.
Now more than ever. And I feel like people say that all the time, and so it feels trite to say now more than ever, but I actually feel like we're in a moment, and I said this on a webinar last week about the anniversary of the centennial anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, and you know, the civic action and work that we need to do to continue fighting for voter protection, because 100 years was apparently not long enough to make sure that we all have access to the vote.
Yes. And it's not static. We have to continue working for these changes. Like, I think one thing we saw in the past years, it's like, we can't just like vote and then sit back and say we did it. Like, it's, I mean, Stacey Abrams talks about this. It's a process, not an act. So, but again, that might sound daunting. Don't be overwhelmed. You are doing it in community with so many incredible people in the Jewish community, outside of that. And so you have that family to lean on, but you have to get out there.
And you have to talk about what you learned today, and Tiffany's story and the story. And if you don't know Jews of color, that's okay. But, if you don't know, if you know people, well, I was going to say if you know people who don't know Jews, but then that wouldn't really make sense. But that's not a thing.
Maybe they don't know you're Jewish. Be loud and proud about your Judaism.
Loud and proud. That's
whether it's a CrossFit Tel Aviv shirt or like a Magan David necklace, like, yeah, let them know.
We're proud Zionesses in the new year.
Yeah.
And show up with our unabashedly progressive, unapologetically Zionist selves everywhere we go. So thank you all so much, Tiffany. Thank you. I totally adore you. I'm so grateful to you.
Shana Tova
to everyone. And please reach out if you need anything. My email is amanda@zionist.org.